So as far as MVPs, demos, prototypes, proof of concepts, these are all efforts to really communicate your solution. It varies, but I want to tap on Cyrus. Help the audience understand the difference between those two. Forward.
Sure. So basically on the high level, we talked about investors are non-gear, which is obviously unfortunate because that's the first thing that you need funds to do a product offerings. So when someone thinks about developing a product, the first thing to think about is that finished product that goes to production, the final product that you're going to be able to sell. The reality is it's a very expensive trek to get from that concept all the way to the end. And so the question is, what are you trying to achieve in the early phases with a very limited budget that you have to be able to show progress, to show what you're trying to do? And so, there's different terms that are used, but I'll start with the end product, just the MVP, the minimum viable product. And the reason you hear MVP a lot is that when people have an idea, when they have a product, when they have a concept, the first thing they think about is the Apple iPhone, right? It's that amazing product that does 1 million things. But it's a very expensive entry to get there. What is it that you're trying to do? You're trying to provide a product that meets certain requirements. That's the MVP. That's the one that's in production, that's paid in large quantity. The early phase, you have to actually prove that it actually works. Or you have to have something demonstrable that someone can evaluate. And you'll hear a lot when you meet investors about the discovery phase, the customer discovery phase. You don't just develop a product because it's the coolest thing ever. There are a lot of products out there that have been designed and have gotten nowhere. And I know at least one person in this room has designed a bunch of very cool products that the customers did not, the developer did not try to figure out who the end customer was, were they willing to pay for it, and so on. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have something that proves out the concept, maybe a technology proof of concept, a demonstration unit, and you have one where you prove out the concept. It may be a really pretty brick, basically, that you can show to someone and say, would you buy something that looks like this if I tell you it's going to do all these things? So this is a very early proof of concept. The next one is the prototype, a functional prototype. And that prototype is something that does everything you want it to do, and it will not be something that you produce. So does anybody know what an Arduino is in here, or a Raspberry Pi? Okay. These, and there's a bunch of other ones, BeagleBone and so on. These are developer kits. So if you're trying to develop a medical device, for example, or you're trying to design some sort of an IoT sensor, outdoor sensor, ag sensor, when you go through the process, what you try to prove out and show is how it's going to work. It doesn't matter what process you're using. The communications don't necessarily have to have everything that you're looking for at the end, whether it's Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular, and so on. That prototype is a fully functional prototype that will be able to do everything that you need. But the guts inside are not the final product. And that prototype is much cheaper to develop than the final product. So, my company does a lot of development of what I call multidisciplinary, integrated product development, electronics, firmware, systems, mechanicals. And one of the things that happens a lot is we need to develop custom circuit boards. Very expensive. That custom circuit board is something you do at the end. That's a reason to make those custom boards. And that gives you the MVP. So basically, if you think about the process, and the process is iterative, it's happening, you got to change things, you put one together, and someone's going to say it's too big, it's too heavy, it doesn't do this, I need this, I need to know what the temperature is, whatever. All of these things are going to start with something that is a proof of concept, a variety of prototypes, and then ultimately something that you can actually manufacture. Then that was a long explanation. Hopefully it made sense.
So I just want to point out, it's levels. That's the main thing, right? Typically you see demos, MVPs, it's pretty similar. But he's pointing out that it's real differences between all four of them. So Bryan, right? So Bryan, it's an interesting situation because he's also a prototype manufacturer, founder, like making products, right? But he also works like in the Salisbury University Makerspace that is within the entrepreneurial center, right? So what does that do? If you're an entrepreneur, you have a prototype in that area, I could work with this actual makerspace to develop it, right? So Bryan, I want you to talk a little bit about your product and then like what influenced to create it at all? Was it just your ability because I'm in the space, I could do it? Like help us understand that a bit.
Right. So I mentioned co-founder Mike and I are developing something in the baby sleep market. And I know my parents did this, and maybe your parents did this, your parents now, and you do this. When nothing else works to lull your young one, typically a newborn or a toddler, off to sleep, what do you typically do? When all else fails, you put them in the car, put them in the back seat, right? You drive them around the block until they lull off to sleep. And then, of course, you run the risk of the weather. If the door doesn't quite close quiet enough, right, you wake them up, and the whole cyclical cycle starts over again. So my partner, we're both musicians, and he was at his brother's house for dinner one evening, and his brother wasn't there. His wife said, he's out driving the child around the block. It's fussy, won't go to bed. And his brother came back and talked to Mike and said, man, that was a third round, but I think it'll stud, right? If you could bottle that, whatever that is, you'd be on to something. So Mike's sharing the story with me, and after we rehearsed one night by music, then he pulls out this huge black box as prototypes initially start, right? Nothing like the end that iterative process, and but I got it right away. I said, my parents did that. And on the list to talk about, I don't want to jump the gun a little bit, but it's about how you're leveraging your skills and start to think about team, even at the very early stages. Mike, being a musician and audio engineer, had a skill set, a unique trade of skills that was very poignant in developing our POC for Lullify, and I had a business background, right? Had MBA and had started another company overseas before. And so we got together, we each got it. I started doing some diligence research in the area, find out it's a global phenomenon, right? They do this the most in England and Wales. They spend about $1,000 a year in petrol doing this. It takes about, how many hours they spend? About 48 hours total annually driving children around the block, right? So there's something to that, and they do it across the U.S. 1 in 5 newborns has a sleeping disorder. How many millions of newborns? You got your total addressable market, right? You go through this whole process. But then how do we get to a POC, right? This phenomenon, driving around the block. Well, how do I package that? How do I bottle that? So long story short, Mike being an audio engineer, we mic'd up a car, right? We mic'd up a vehicle and drove around for a week and recorded all of what was happening. What is happening? Well, it turns out it's the low frequency rumbles, right? It's the intermittent vibrations, the speed bumps, different mode textures, white noise that's happening, background noise. Okay, well, again, how do you package that? How do you prove we can replicate on something like that? And then through my research, I discovered why it's so effective, especially on young children, is that it replicates what's happening in mother's womb, right? When baby is developing. So, we have frequencies. We can control frequencies. Can we record them? We did record it. Can we play them back? Ultimately, yeah. I think we could do something with this, and now the next step was proving ultimately or creating a prototype to actually have families test this. So we get a focus group ultimately. Look nothing like this, very crude, off-the-shelf parts. But discovered, when to digress too much, discovered quite a few things that led to ultimately MVP, right, and prototype and funding, etc. But it was a very unique process and inexpensive because we had a skill set, I guess is the main point. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. If you don't have to learn new skills or pay for a lot of resources initially to prove your concept, you can leverage what skill sets you have to get beyond be on that stage, because POC obviously is a big determinant. Are we going to leverage more capital? Are we going to spend more money moving forward? So the phenomenon was the interest, why I initially did it, because my parents did it. I wanted to understand, why is that so effective? Can we bottle it? And it turns out we can.
Awesome. Discuss your experience developing your first iteration and the transitions that happened within that.
It's been a journey. I started my journey in 2012 while working I'm a clinical hospital and retail hospital manager by trade. Worked 17 years opening and managing CVS's and another 17 in hospital. When I was attending pharmacy school, I worked at a private hospital, and I noticed that complicated problem of filtering back then. And during my many years of retail, I totally forgot about it. But my cash, it was always hospital, so I went back to hospital, and I continued to see the problem. So it became my why. So you have to find your why, and it has to be your passion, number one. So my first iteration, one of my customers from retail was a patent attorney, and I wanted to solve this problem. So I brought him in, I brought a technician in, and we brainstormed, we came up with a prototype, so then I applied for my first patent. And I bootstrapped my way through 2 patents and a prototype. I met a guy in a bar one night, at that tiny little bar in Comus, Maryland, near Sugarloaf. And nobody else was there except my girlfriends and him, and turns out he was the inventor of the EpiPen injector. So he introduced me to a company that invented EpiPen. So I went with them, and I met them in Denver, Pennsylvania, and said, hey, I've got this patent, can you build it? And it was really high, got my patent, and they said, nope, we can't build the mold. So I went from really high to really low. There's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows. So they, in turn, one of the representatives of the company introduced me to 2 guys down in North Carolina that had a startup called Galero, and they were a manufacturing design company. And I happened to be down there looking at Duke University for my son, so I met with them and we brainstormed and came up with a working prototype. So that was kind of the start of that, and then I applied for another patent in 2018. I got my second patent, and then I realized I had to get out of the house and start talking to people, networking, conducted clinical trials, first we did surveys around, one of my secret sauces is I have a lot of network in the healthcare space. So I talked to pharmacists, I talked to nurses, I talked to doctors. And that second prototype was worked until just recently, and about 3 years down the line, I guess in 2021, we signed a contract to develop this. I had, so I bootstrapped my way through 2 patents and a prototype, and then I started taking friends and family money. And I had enough money to develop my third iteration, which does not have a cap. And we realized that you can, having that less resistance and less product, it's cheaper and safer and easier in the long run. So now we're on our third iteration, and we are just answering FDA questions. We anticipate at the approval spring of 2025. And manufacturing by the end of 2025. It's been a long journey, but we're almost there.
I was going to, how long has it been?
Yes, it's 2012 to 2025. Conception was 12. I was full-time, still working, raising 2 boys. So it was like, everybody go to bed and I'm sitting there working at 12 o'clock at night. So there's a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of early wake-up calls.
Oh, that's the game for you. What you got?
So my experience and my journey did not look like any of this, because my friends and family didn't have any money. And we talk about how expensive the process is, but I didn't have anybody, so that was interesting. Early on, fun fact, I taught sex ed to middle schoolers, or they taught me, from 2013 to 2015. And during that time where I was an educator, I moved back home in a house with 12 family members, 2 dogs, a cat. My grandmother retired from singing with the Shirelles and built like a house with 18 rooms. So I was like at home to save money. And so my beginnings with Femly were more so in the medical device space. We started as a feminine subscription box on the heels of Dollar Shave Club, except periods come monthly, so to me this made more sense. And then in 2018, I ended up with E. coli sepsis, and I was on life support for almost a month and lost a child to stillbirth. And after that experience and losing my daughter, I found myself at this inflection point, and I literally was driving around here, around Baltimore, and I remember going past the M&T Bank Stadium and like meeting a woman who I assumed would need money. So I go to hand her the dollar, and she's like, "No, sis, I need a pad." So I asked her, I was like, "What are you wearing if you don't have money for a pad?" She's like, "Oh, there's a Dollar General. I can get like a pack of 10 Hanes socks for $1." So I was like, holy crap, like this is a pain point, but I'm also not at a point in my company where I can give these products away because they cost me money to manufacture. So the idea for the dispenser started then, but I was not an engineer. I was a non-technical founder, knew nothing about MVPs, and like today I was like, what the hell is a PLC besides personal color? But I didn't know anything about anything. And so I actually drew out our EcoFlow dispenser on a napkin. And I remember putting a picture of it on LinkedIn. I'm like, hey, I kind of do this thing without telling people like what it was. I'm like, what is the name of the person that can like turn this drawing into a thing? They're like, oh, you need a product designer, you need a manufacturer, you need CAD designs. This will likely be injection molded. It's going to be ABS plastic like your toaster. And they made it like so tangible and so comfortable in layman's terms for me. So then we get to the money part. I find out that on average for what I was trying to do, that initial MVP prototype would be anywhere from like 25 to 125,000, depending on the features. And I came out the gate, like should have wanted the Honda, but I came out the gate requesting the Rolls Royce. So I wanted a device that used AI for inventory management. I wanted the sensors to turn like LED blue. Like this was going to be like luxury for vaginas, but approachable for all. And I make the first device with a firm out of Atlanta called E-Melody, which is very similar to what Cyrus does. And they do like NASA stuff, but they told me this is going to be $125K for what you want. I'm like, look, I'm kind of broke, but I know how to pitch. I'm good at speaking. And I won 60 pitch competitions and 1.3 million and paid them in increments, which was great because that's what he agreed. It gets.
I know someone who's sure factory competition too.
Yeah. And so they built that device. I put it on TikTok. It went viral, 70 million views. It brought 3,000 companies. And we were in a pickle where we did not have enough money to produce more than one. So that journey was interesting because going from idea to initial prototype and design to like now it's demanded in market, but I don't have enough money to make a bunch of them. It led us to really dive deep with customers. And one of the things that we found that was interesting was that people didn't necessarily need something that was that sexy. Like most of them were just trying to be compliant with laws. Right now, there are 60 laws that require free feminine care in schools around the country. But DC's law is interesting in that you also have to provide free feminine care in every single government building. So we hatched a plan to pursue 3 less expensive designs. And when I say less expensive, I mean we had an alternate dispenser that is like $2.50 to manufacture, opposed to $99, you know? And we started putting those in market, and it turns out the non-sensor-based, non-electricity devices are our most popular, but this was the kind of model and MVP experience that has led us now to a model where organizations around the world are paying us per bathroom, per unit, in perpetuity for the lifetime that this is on the wall. We are Georgia Pacific for vaginas now.
Great story. But I want to point to a couple things that are common if you put it up. The first one and the most important one for me is anytime I meet someone who comes to us and wants to do development is the passion. There's really a passion. They're very excited. Why? Because if you're not passionate about what you're going to do, and you're going to go through this journey of ups and downs and begging for money and broken prototypes and missed opportunities, it's not going to work. You're just going to you're going to be a very unhappy person. It's not going to work out. The second thing is time. All of this takes time. It just doesn't happen today. Because you've got the most amazing idea, you may even have a working prototype, you're not going to turn around tomorrow and make a bunch of money. There's a long trek to get there. And the last one is, in all three cases, they were developing a product that was solving an actual problem. They weren't just developing something really cool. Because I see both Sue and Arion's designs, and they're awesome. They look great. They work well. They're well thought out. But if no one's going to buy them, there's no room for it. So.
And for timeline, I didn't say that. From concept and drawing to actual first iteration of the unit, I think for us was 6 months, which is extremely quick. But in that, I was flying back and forth to Atlanta, just breaking it, throwing it against the wall, watching them do Q&A. Mostly I wanted content for Instagram, but I was very, very involved. And then it was interesting because for Dispenser 2, we now have EcoFlow, EcoLight, EcoBox sits on a stall right near the toilet. For Dispenser 2 through 4, it was 6 weeks. You become so ingrained with the process that you are able to streamline and optimize as well.
So in general, right, I want to point out something. It's a lot of strategy in this iteration, right? You're constantly talking to the customer, understanding the problem a bit more so you can have a better solution. Along with that, testing before you get deep into it. I've actually worked with a founder. They had millions already, and they put $8 million into this solution. And I'm just thinking wow, you haven't tested, you haven't done enough to validate I should put all this money into it. But when it's a passion project, it varies. But in general, you can see the real approach you should have is more iteration. Now, with that being said, raise your hand if you know what customer discovery is. Okay. All right. Customer discovery. So when you think about, raise your hand if you heard of the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps. Okay, more hands, sorry. So at a high level, right, NSF, I-Corps, we're trying to commercialize the research that we have throughout the country, right? So in this process, I've been through it a couple times. In this process, you're really trying to understand what's your beachhead market, what is the ideal problem you should solve. A lot of times in those situations, you already have a solution. So you're trying to figure out what's the right problem, right? So it's a lot of things to go into that. The main thing I want to point out, in that customer discovery process, the key thing is do not sell, right? You're there to learn. I need to understand the pain points. If I sell you on whatever the idea is, I'm starting to create bias. And that bias is going to cloud what I actually see as the problem, and it's going to influence how I create the solution, right? So for the panelists, help me understand, ideally, you're talking to the customer, you're learning from them, understanding the pain point, you iterate your product. Sue, help the audience understand your experiences with customer discovery and how it influences your pivots down the line.
So we started customer discovery in 2018. Once I received my second patent, there was a course online called through Udacity, How to Build a Startup with Stephen Case. Is that right? Stephen, I think that's it. And so I sat by the pool, and I realized I had to get out of the house. I had to learn how to network, and I had to talk to customers to make sure this is something that was a pain point for them and they needed. So that was me and my secretary, and it's still just a two-man team. And she and they're both pharmacists, my secretary and vice president. We rented a hotel room. We invited all of our friends. And we had them try the current method, and then we had them try FRAW, filter removal of glass, my medical device, and we realized, and when we timed it, it takes half the time, and they talked about needle stick injuries, which I never even knew, and I never knew what a value proposition was, but I did win the Salisbury Shore Hatchery contest, and I collected TechCo Builder Fund. And through that, and then the FITSE Edge program, and through the incubators, accelerators, I learned the whole lead business model canvas. I feel like I deserve an MBA after but talking to the customers, and then we're working with a company called Becton Dickinson, and they're the largest needle sellers in the world. So they funded human factor studies in both the U.S. and in Europe. And interestingly enough, it was in Paris, I think, and one of the nurses said, and they know they need a red needle and they need to switch it to a yellow needle, but they never understood why. And you could see like a light bulb go off of them 3/4 of the way through. And they're like, oh, we're filtering glass shards, so there's a lot of understanding that and at any ER doc that I've talked to, none of them filter, there's not enough time. So saving time, saving money, it just validated our customer discovery research and made it more appealing to investors to help invest. And I started with a napkin and a bar, so yeah.
Arion, what you got?
I'm sorry. What
same
thing
question.
I'm so much.
So,
Customer service. Oh, that was the biggest pain in the. I can't say ass. It was the biggest pain in the butt. I think because as someone who is like very headstrong and completely a visionary, I am not the integrator. Like we have a chief of staff who, even at events like this, I have to take a selfie with a person, say their name. He will find their LinkedIn and like rewrite my follow-up, and then I get it done. But with customer discovery, it was very much engagement across all platforms. I mean, I was in folks' DMs on LinkedIn. That was how we found our IP attorney. I scheduled and set out a budget of like $50 a month and $5 Starbucks gift cards, and I would just send them to guys like, hey, can we have a virtual coffee date? And 9 times out of 10, people were like, of course, like no one's ever offered me anything. So that helped us like meet with different people, whether it be the chief operations officer at a corporation like BGE, who we just launched with, or the head of marketing at M&T Bank Stadium, which was our first like BAU restaurant customer. And so I would say that like from a customer discovery standpoint, in the beginning, it is very easy to be biased and assume that you know who is the person that's going to purchase from you. It is so easy to assume the value proposition, assume the outcome and impact. Like in the beginning, I thought that, Femly is just increasing feminine care. We had no idea until we started like pilots, and this wasn't paid, and I think that's why he was saying like don't focus on sales, but we had no idea that in hotels we were reducing linen waste and disposal by 87%. If women aren't bleeding on sheets and towels, you don't have to throw them out. So that was a cost savings. In healthcare, we were increasing patient experience scores, which is how healthcare is funded. In education, we decreased student absenteeism. Students were now in class. 1 in 5 young girls miss class because of their cycle. And so talking to different customers across segments helped us paint a picture of how to sell, why to sell, but then more importantly, what to measure. And it was only then that we decided to like jump in and do those initial sales. And I think we raised like $1.6 million to start. We did have participation from TEDCO, but that $1.6 million took 4 phone calls because we had done the work, we had gotten traction, we had case studies, we had data, we had customer references in our Google Drive. Like we just made it so unmistakable for people to tell us no, that those yeses became a little bit easier. And I do want to say, keep yourself open because that outcome that you assume may happen may be completely upended. Now, at a time where DEI is being scaled back, people assume that like Femly would struggle because it's feminine care. But if you look at our website, there is no like period equity. There isn't even social justice language, but we are a social justice company. And so I think, doing all of this will help you inform how to best, build.
I do want to point to one interesting thing that you say. I don't know if we'll talk about that, but just quickly, in your case, you're B2B, right? And you just mentioned return on investment. I think that's the biggest question that we ask customers when they come to us and say, hey, I'd like to develop this product. But what we ask them is, how much do you want to sell it for, and what do you need to manufacture it for in terms of being able to recover your initial investments? Because that happens very rarely. When you're doing a consumer product, it's a consumer product. Someone's going to buy it if they like it and it's not too expensive. But B2B, the customers buy it because they're looking for savings. They're looking to reduce cost of something. There has to be a return on investment. And for B2B, we always ask our customers, or recommend to our customers, show the story. Why should they buy that product from you and not from somebody else? And if it's a new product, what is that product going to do that's going to reduce their operating costs?
And don't be afraid to touch on emotion. I think that it is very easy if you're building a technical product and you have such a decorated background and you are the former physician to be super technical and not come to these conversations with a soul. Like, I'm in rooms of men all the time who have no idea what a crib feels like, at least not their pelvis. But it is interesting to walk in that rooms and say, like, hey, Bob, if condoms cause cancer, here's what guys would do within the hour. Like, there's humor, there's emotion, you might not relate to this, but your daughter might. Like, don't be afraid to tap into the human side. Because with things being, very uncertain, I think a lot of people feel like things can be harder and they don't have to be.
And I'll just add empathy, right, as I'm sure most of you know, is at the core of design thinking, right? That's at the core of lean startup methodology. And that's what we found is with Lullify, just briefly, that it was very easy because parents or babies aren't sleeping, parents aren't sleeping. It affects their personal relationships, their work relationships, the amount of accidents that mothers get into driving baby to go see the doctor because baby's not sleeping, to the tune of 100,000 a year, right? So all of this was gleaned by asking open-ended customer discovery questions, not yes, no. Would you buy this? Maybe, yes, no. And you really can empathize and understand that deep pain point and bottle pain to where what are we trying to test or demo to resolve. It's not just will baby fall asleep, but how will babies fall asleep? How long will baby fall asleep? What have they tried previously that's not working to the set of, or to lead them to the desperation of getting in a car and doing this, right?
So yeah, empathy is always a key component. To listen, not sell, as you've all alluded to, but that's a key piece.
I will add one thing based on what Justin said. So we received that there's dilutive and non-dilutive funding. You want to get the non-dilutive if you can, because you don't have to pay that back. So we applied for SBI or NIH grants, NSF, and after 4 or 5 times applying, I finally received an NSF grant. But then they ask you to go to an I-Corp boot camp. So I actually have done 2 I-Corp boot camps. And you learn a lot by talking to the end user and feeling their pain. And like, we never thought about needle stick injuries or time savings until we went out there and talked to the customers and realized these are pain points that we can fix. And from that I-Corp interview, from just one I-Corp interview, talking to a nurse practitioner, it went up to the top, to the head of SICU department in a very large military hospital, and they've already requested over 1,000 units for our first sale.
So as you see, right, there's a lot of strategy in these customer discovery activities. A couple I want to point out is understanding the stakeholder map, right? They're all solving a problem. Within I-Corps, they tell you, like, who's the decision maker, right? Find them and then have those conversations. But one thing I've learned, like, I'm a former healthcare management consultant, you can have a solution. Let's say the decision maker is a doctor, right? But there are other stakeholders that influence that doctor's decision, right? If you think about the cultural aspects of when you're in the hospital, the nurses are a huge value prop of that. So you need to understand the full ecosystem and all the stakeholders involved. Other thing, when it comes to strategy, Arion mentioned it, the research, the stats, the metrics, that all fuels like what your customer discovery output is, right? So have that in mind for sure. So taking a quick transition, right? You talk a lot about the strategy behind building the actual product, but when it comes to actually building it, right? So quick, small story time. So I did my first patent at 22, worked a dead-end job. When I get stressed, I'm like, I gotta build something. So I made a patent, reached out to a company, was like, oh yeah, I have this idea. It was called Podcast, AKA, you're a young kid. Mom, I want these shoes. I only have $20. Can you send $80 to this account? It's online. It's the direct cart, and then I could buy it. Okay. But at the time, 22, I'm like, oh, it's a great idea. Went with a company called World Patent Marketing. Anybody heard of them? Good.
It sounds legit.
I thought so. I was naive. So worked with them, had a couple conversations. They're eating up the idea. They're making me feel good. That was great. And it was like, all right, it's $14,000. I'm like, I ain't got that, obviously. Grandma, please, like, I have a good idea, blah, blah, blah. Gives me the money. They do the patent. They ghost me. So I got all the feedback. I don't know what to do with that. I'm like in between jobs. I'm like, it's gotta die. So that patent literally is in my book bag for the last 8 years. So random. But in that case, right, and concluding that, the SEC did sue them, or one of the organizations were, but they sued them. I got $400 back. Okay, so to the panelists, right? I wish I knew who you all were at the time. I didn't. So help the audience understand like how you should go about building the actual solution. Cyrus, you can go ahead because this is your.
Sure. Yeah, so on the patent, just in general, the main thing is a patent. First off, there's an application process. The application process, there's basically a utility or design patent. If it's a design patent, you just protect it what it looks like. So you want to protect the Volkswagen Beetle, you patent that, and you want to copy it. But the utility patent is what you're looking for. And the utility patent application, all it says, the minute you apply for it, and it's with the U.S. Patent Office, it just basically protects your idea. But it is not granted until the U.S. Patent Office looks at it and says it's grantable. The reason I want to mention this is you're talking about the strategy in terms of building a product. The thing that's more important than any patent is making sure that you're not infringing on somebody else's patent. That's the very first one. The second one is the customer discovery, understanding who your customer is, what they want, what they need. The third thing that I recommend our customers is developing a set of features, basically requirements of what they want to do. It doesn't have to be final or permanent, but it has to be something. We have to be able to mount it on the wall. It has to be able to dispense one tampon that's this size, and it have to be able to put 20 in them. So that's another thing that you want to develop, because otherwise you can go to a company like ours and you can develop the product 20 times because we'll develop what you ask us to develop. So that's a very important item. And then ultimately, what's your sales and distribution approach? And I could tell you the most common, actually, can anybody guess what is the most common consumer sales approach? Anybody? I'm sorry, kiss it. Direct. Direct is one way. How do you find your customers? I mean, they have to find your website and everything else. What else? That too, but Amazon, Walmart. That's the two things that we always hear. Well, those are two very different things. And you have to have that connection with them. And Amazon will sell whatever, but they're selling millions of whatevers. And so if there's a tampon dispenser, you may find 20 or 30 or 40 of them on there. That competition is different. So you have to understand who you're selling to, and Walmart wants 1 million. They're not interested, you can make them 10 or 20. So if they have these things, that's when we start. And then they obviously build up a strategy. They do this a lot with everything else, but we take the requirements. And then we work with them on figuring out what is the first thing that they want to do. Do they want to reduce risk? Do they want to do a technology verification? Do they want to do a user experience, right? So if you have a tampon dispenser that's attached, I'm going to use your example the whole time. If that's through the wall and you can't reach it, well, you got a problem. If it requires, tiny little fingers, all those other things. Those are the ideas that we work with companies, and you want to know how your product is going to be used. You want to know what the requirements are, how it's going to be implemented. In the case of, you'll hear IoT a lot, outdoor sensors. We all have something outside that tells us the weather, or a camera to look at a bird. Well, it has to survive outdoor environment. That's not a requirement. So that's the first thing that we develop, and we work with the customers on, and you should have that before you go to a company and say, design this for me, because, again, it's very open-ended. And then the other thing that you also have to understand is the overall product development from end to end, because that prototype is the first stage. Then there's going to be iterations, design changes, board prototypes, and then tooling. If you have, Femly has a bunch of products. Many of the parts are injection molded. We're talking about tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in tooling costs. So understanding that.
And I do want to say diligence. We didn't talk about that today, but don't do any of this without talking to someone that has done it, so that you know who to avoid, so that you know what questions to ask. Just make sure you have someone who is like your personal advisory person for this, because having a Cyrus in your ecosystem, you will save so much money and so much heartache.
Yeah, and I'll just add this. You bring up many good points today, Cyrus, but the IP side, right? Something unique we do at the Rommel Center, thanks to MMIP grants from TEDCO. We have an IP attorney, more or less on retainer. He's our go-to. So we offer consults for those that are prototyping in our Makerspace or clients. And one thing to your question earlier, problems I see clients that come in that want to prototype or develop something is, and you've won several competitions, what do you say, 60?
I think I do 69 on Friday.
69 competitions.
Well, during those competitions, right, so when you are at a stage to demo, show something, you want to protect that, right? So the clock starts ticking, right, from a legal standpoint, when you start sharing secret sauce elements of your product, right, your service.
And I just want to be clear, we have a non-confidential photo of the dispenser where features are completely missing. I had someone Photoshop them out. I never give people the cake, just a slice.
So competitions, you can hit away with, here's the overall concept, problem, fan, solution, and here's what's unique, here's who it's for, here's our revenue stream, right, our projections, etc. Yes, we see viability in that. But when you get sometimes to an angel round, right, people more interested, they don't want to be bothered with NDAs. They want to see it. They want to know it. Can you open it? We want to look inside. So when you start to share those secret sauce elements, and there will be a time when you have to do that, the clock starts ticking, and you can file provisionals, right, online, on your own. The more intricate your product, service, platform, SaaS, whatever that might be, it may behoove you to pay an attorney to file something and go through the legalese and all of the potential claims you're making. But at minimum, a provisional patent, less than $200 to file, which offers you that year-long protection as you're sharing, trying to get Series A funding, C funding, et cetera. So very important, and that comes up a lot. People who have shared or ideas have been taken, or the potential for ideas to be taken because that clock, when they started sharing certain aspects.
Awesome. Okay.
And the provisional patent will protect you for that 1 year while you're either mulling over, and you'll get rejected because the patent office always wants more money, so you just keep fighting. Don't stop.
And there are many of the law schools around here have pre-law clinics that you can go in. I did many of my early IP, trademarks, everything with George Washington's law clinic because we were based in D.C. This area also has an organization called Maryland Lawyers for the Arts, which will do the same thing for free as well.
And TEDCO has advisors, and they charge very minimal price for all types of advice, especially in legal, in legal, not especially.
No. Awesome. So because of timing, we're getting close to the end. I just want to end with Last advice for like everybody raised their hands at the beginning. We have a lot of founders in here, people building prototypes. So just the last advice from each of the panelists.
I would say, number one, don't give up. Keep going. Listen to what other people, and surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, and build a good team. Customer discovery, building a good team, having people smarter than you, and having advisors, and build a village of supporters, and you'll get there. Don't ever give up. Just keep plugging away. There's going to be high highs, and there's a lot of low lows. So you have to kind of find an even balance and try to get some sleep at some point.
I'll reference, I guess he might be an old school OG at this point, Guy Kawasaki.
I don't know. But the art of the start, right? I remember reading The Art of the Start, and I was guilty of this, developing a lullaby, right? That you're going through proof of concept, and you want to get into the demo, and you're prototyping, wow, this could have a nightlight on it. You could have a Swiss Army knife on it. You could have a recipe book in it. You could have all these things, and you get locked into analysis paralysis, right, to some degree, and you never launch some of each to market, etc. So that minimal viable product, if you're lucky enough to get through the iterations and get to that point and get your feature set that's based on customer discovery, that core problem pain, launch it. Get that website launch, do it, and then iterate quickly, V2, V3, V4, based on more feedback, right? The aesthetics of the product. This doesn't quite, can I get it blue? Can I get it red? Can we get an extra button? Can we do all this? Because we originally wanted to have a Bluetooth right on our part. Well, that's extra money to have COVID and to have put in and do all that. Where through customer discovery, beta testing with a focus group, 5 different families at home, they never used it, right? They didn't care. It was, will baby go to sleep better than anything they've already spent hundreds of dollars on, driving around the car. And yes, that was the core function, and no batteries. So it had to be USB, battery rechargeable. So listening to the customer, but don't be afraid, don't get locked into iterating, it's got to be perfect. It will never be perfect. Right.
And keep it simple.
Yeah.
I think that's what Bryan's saying. Make it simple.
I would say leverage. We are in the most, and I'm from New York, I've launched in DC, I've been all over the country, but I feel like we are in the most resource ecosystem ever. There is so much effing money between Richmond and Philly, and we are right in the middle of it. So don't be scared to reach out to your programs and like ESOs, support organizations. Here in Baltimore, you can get $5,000 from Loyola through their Baltimore program. Upsurge Baltimore has a program that can give you up to $120,000. Beacon Baltimore gives a $20,000 grant. Ignite Capital gives $20,000 and more. Like, there's so much money here, so definitely leverage the hell out of ChatGPT to understand who the organizations are and how you can get into the fold or pop into like a tech and manufacturing happy hour. Leverage your local law schools, law clinics. Reach out to whoever is our community at the schools. For example, I used to, when we didn't have an office, I worked out of the WeWork on the campus of College Park. But like, people seeing me, even though I went to Morgan State at like 15, they thought I was a student there. But then that turned into an investment from Dingman. So the second recommend to get investment from University of Maryland College Park. But because of that, there's now $50,000 grants we can apply to. We're working with students for manufacturing right here on their campus. So like, leverage the schools and colleges. Leverage the resources that Technical provides. And more importantly, if you are not active on LinkedIn, show up on there like it's Tinder. Put your cute headshot, slide into the DMs for someone, and engage, because that thing that you need to make this a little bit easier is just on the other side of a message. And if you reach out to myself or any of us, I'm sure we could all point you into the direction of many of the organizations that we all worked with and give you a firsthand experience for how that went, what it cost, et cetera, directly.
We want to help. We want to make it easy, right? The Rollo Center, if you're ever in Salisbury, we have a University System of Maryland micro grants to offset costs for prototyping, right? We have a prototyping lab. Josh Killen, my Makerspace specialist, phenomenal. I was able to onboard him because of an MMIP grant, right? So leveraging all these resources to enhance the ecosystem of prototyping, and we're upscaling our equipment, new resin printers, etc. Josh formed his own design company to assist with the design, Fusion 360, right? Design services, very affordable services, and everything we do at the center is at no cost. So by coming into the lab, prototyping in the lab, iterating in the lab, if you're incubated in the lab, no cost to be incubated and have a space and develop your business, access to our IP attorney at no cost, right, initially. So we want to help uplift this and educate and have people learn how to use Fusion 360, prototype, iterate, make, and do to get more in the pipeline, right?
Quick question. Sue, how long was your pitch for Sure Hatchery, and how much money did you get?
My pitch was 1 minute.
And how many?
There was fifth place, so I got $10,000.
And mine was 60 seconds. We won 28,000. So
Yeah.
And we give away $200,000. It's a biannual competition. Annually, you can ask up to $50,000 per competitor to do that. So yeah, you want to find out more about Shore Hatchery competition? Open to anybody, the community on the Eastern Shore. Reach out.
And look for the money in TEDCO. TEDCO has a number of funds, some that are non-dilutive, you don't have to pay them back, and all the way up to C, Bridge, and Series A. So TEDCO is your resource to start, I would say. And I started with TEDCO Prelude Pitch. So get your pitch together, get a pitch deck together, and pitch at TEDCO.
Justin put it on the board all the time, so be coachable, be coachable, be coachable. That's the most important thing. Get a lot of people around you. We have a table IP attack to see what we do. You happen to talk to anyone, or Will is open bowl, for free in the first spaces.
Okay, last 20 seconds. Okay, I had to get so. Oh, number one, understand EQ fuels adaptability. So they talked a lot about empathy. It's an emotional journey. Be cognizant of that. And then the ability to pivot and modernize based on customer feedback is a skill set. It's a skill set. If you get better at it, just practice. And the last thing is take feedback with a grain of salt. I made it a point to understand the perspectives you have here. You don't want to just take feedback, oh, this person said this, okay, great, I'm change everything. You need to understand this person is this background, they're looking at it from this lens, and they want you to change this specific thing. Do you agree on that? Okay, make the adjustment and keep it going. So let's give a round of applause for the panelists.